My adolescent attempts to imitate academic art,
Right.
and I,
Oh, you know what? I did see that.
and
yeah.
that painting, just by a series of odd coincidences, found its way back to me all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
And what it opened my eyes up to is that I've kind of always had this interest.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
first of all, in figurative art, but then secondly, in mythological subject matter.
mm-hmm.
And I think what interests me about it is that I look at mythology, and I think about how it's been a constant throughout a good period of Western art, and not only Western art, but other art. And one consistency about it
Hey,
is that
Kate.
it's,
How are you?
So sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to
Not
say
at all.
hi and thank you so much for coming out.
Of course. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
give me a second to gather my thoughts. It's what's been a sort of a constant about it is that it's always changed in a way that reflected the proclivities of the time,
Mm-hmm.
So I have a soft spot for French academic painting of the 17 and 1800s, and that the idealized figures in that look different from the idealized figures that you would see in the Renaissance, and they would look different than the idealized figures you'd see in the Greek and Roman.
And yet all still idealized. So
They're all
in some way.
idealized, but they're all reflect, the, I don't like the word proclivities, but I can't think what word I want. The tastes, for a simple word there. The tastes of the time, they reflect ideals of the time.
Right.
And so my idea of basically using mythology was that it was just a convenient hook on which to hang really a lot of other things
Right.
that deal with our times.
Right.
Dress
And-
these comments up a little.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I'll insert some,
Better words?
multi-syllable words.
Yeah.
Just to throw people off as much as possible. Right. So it's obviously a fascination of many artists throughout history, mythology. But I remember our conversation when you were first telling me about the series had something to do with the fact that it's like the nude as an excuse or something, or as
Yeah.
a sort of
Or mythology is an
smokescreen.
excuse, yeah.
Yeah. For so
I mean,
what's that about?
smokescreen or excuse are kind of strong words.
Okay.
You could use those words, but I just mean, there was a time when it was absolutely an excuse, because, Manet's Luncheon in the Grass was famously controversial because he did not make the woman or the people in the picture mythological characters.
Right.
Because he made it appear to be real contemporary people.
Right.
It scandalized France.
Right.
And that was my point. So, prior to that, people have, I think, a sort of natural desire to look at the human figure and to paint the human figure, depict it in some way. But the conventions of different, social conventions of different periods required certain, you had to do certain things in order for it to be acceptable. And one of the things you could do was make it mythological.
Right.
So that's what I meant. I think people had this desire, and actually during the period where mythology wasn't accepted, during the Middle Ages, religion took over, which was sort of my last series,
Yeah.
which was about how a lot of figurative stuff, but also a lot of other issues were inserted into art via these religious subjects.
Right.
And so, actually, again, it's the same thing with this. So, I think,
There's a play that's going on, which I'm going to see tonight, called Body Awareness by Annie Baker, and part of it is part of the plot involves a photographer who's known for his female nudes, and the other characters are trying to figure out whether he's a serious artist or he's just using photography as a way to gain access to female nudes, right? That's not exactly what you're aiming at, but
No.
there's a certain parallel there.
well, one of the things I said, and which was quoted by Jack, my joke, and by telling you it's a joke ahead of time, it loses its impact. But I said it, and people didn't know where it was going, and then it was the funny ending. But I said, when I posed for Spencer Tunick, I just looked at this like sea of people, and I thought to myself, there's no one here who's attractive. And see, it worked anyway.
Yeah.
And the point I was making was, with those rare exceptions of those extraordinary individuals who find their way into fashion, make illustration, and so on,
Right.
and are even then airbrushed and modified and so on. Most people are, to a degree, imperfect, and that's how we are. So part of this, I've called it my unidealized idealism.
Right.
That these are like regular people, and in fact, I don't hire models. I get people I know to do it. In many cases, I just offer them the chance. Let me tell you something here. So this person, she actually came to me, and I think she told me she weighed something like 380 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked me if she could be a subject, and I said, sure. I probably would have been like uncomfortable asking her, but she asked me. And she's intuitive. She's in the one over there. And I think the thing is that, it's a little bit too pat and corny to say I wanted to find the beauty in her.
Mm-hmm.
But but it kind of happens. I want to represent the people as they look without flinching, but at the same time, I think there's a degree of selectivity to pick ones that have a certain visual appeal.
Right. So in terms of, like, you said an idealism, which is interesting because now with all the talk about body image that we hear constantly,
what I'm dealing with,
yeah. So imperfection is in a way a new sort of emerging idealism in the 21st century. It is like there's a lot of stuff now about be proud about your body.
Right.
Dove commercials with finally, where we're seeing like plus size women.
Actually, I missed those.
Yeah, there's stuff like that all over.
Yeah,
It hasn't made its way into Vogue yet, but it's out there as this new sort of like so.
But this makes me think of Jenny Saville, for instance. You know Jenny Saville's work?
Not really.
You will. If you look it up, you'll say, "Oh yeah, I've seen that."
Yeah.
A lot of her work are basically self-portraits.
Yeah.
And she's not as heavy as she makes herself look, but she paints herself in the most unflattering ways possible. Right. And I think there's like two extremes. One is idealizing people that are already pretty darn close to a physical ideal anyway, and then there's pushing unattractiveness to the point of being repulsive. And I'm okay with that. I enjoy that, but I don't want to go to either extreme.
My pen died. I'm going to have to go borrow one.
Okay.
Be right back. No, you know what? It's working. So say that again. You're saying there's the people who are already pretty much ideal who get, even more idealized through the Photoshop process, and then what?
Or whatever, yeah. And then there's the artists that push unattractiveness to its absolute limit.
Right.
Almost kind of an in-your-face unattractiveness, and I guess I'm sort of taking a middle ground where people look like they look, and there's been a few people that have come to me and they're sort of attractive, and I say, oh, well, okay. And there's some that I don't even mean sort of attractive. I genuinely think they're all attractive, and that's my point. Is that I think that we tend to have this idealized notion of beauty, and I'm capable and attempting, I guess, but I'm also sort of intuitively capable of appreciating everyone.
Right.
So, like, this guy has a kind of mushy body, and she's, sort of ethnically not ethnically ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not idealized Greek or Roman figures. And Psyche is a woman known for being the most beautiful woman.
Right.
And Eros is a god known for having either, he's also a Cupid, so he's either depicted as a child or a very feminine man.
Right.
And this actually depicts a moment in the story. And some of these do, and some are more and some are just allegorical figures.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, let me tell you another piece over here. I'll tell you from here. I don't want to influence other people's viewing pleasure. That one right there with the blue background.
Yeah.
So that's called Allegory for Painting, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so the figure is painted in kind of like a classic Renaissance. I mean, aside from the fact that the colors are amped up, it's that Renaissance three-dimensional, illusion of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a kind of lie. So this kind of connects to the title. That's a kind of lie. It's actually totally flat, but it's the illusion of being three-dimensional. The background she's against, notice that a lot of these people are against sort of neutral or flat backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of the exception. Is basically based on a Barnett Newman abstract painting, zip painting.
Right.
But the zips, the stripes on the painting are actually physically elevated.
Oh.
So it's a lie. It's not a flat painting. It's a flat painting with a high degree of texture.
I see.
So that's, so while I'm dealing with these issues of beauty and so on, I'm also dealing with art historical themes
Mm-hmm.
of painting.
Right.
And, representing the figure.
Right. So yeah, if you were merely out to show people the sort of your broad definition of beauty and promote a sort of new idealism, you'd probably use a camera.
Yeah.
So you have to be doing some other things there.
It's really about, there's a lot about painting here.
Yeah.
So for instance, that figure who's against that tree
Mm-hmm.
thing, and that figure who's against a different tree, both of those things are wallpapers.
Okay.
That represent forests, and I do a lot of Googling. I Google words like forest wallpaper, and I see the things that come up,
Right.
because both those people are, historically depicted in a forest.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I like the idea that we have contemporary ways of representing a forest that represent, contemporary ideas of art, like abstract art and so on.
Right.
And I play those off these sort of classically rendered figures.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that art component. I mean, the painting component.
Right. What is painting doing exactly? Because you are, try as you might, you are idealizing these people in your own way.
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell me.
Well,
I'm agreeing, but I want to hear what you mean.
Well, you're ennobling them, I guess,
Okay.
in some way, like
Ennobling them,
with some mythological grandeur that they didn't otherwise have.
Right.
Maybe they don't deserve it.
But things like this guy, he's got his glasses, and
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of an ordinary looking guy.
Yeah.
But he's playing a really historically heroic character.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know that.
No.
The story is this guy who, I have to read it, Gaius, Mukayus, Scavola. During the very early days of Rome, it was threatened by another group culture. And he went over to their camp with the intent of assassinating their president, leader, whatever. And he accidentally assassinated the wrong person. Now, whether this is myth or some based on truth, it's not even known, but it's probably at least mythologized.
Yeah.
And he was caught, of course. And so he said, I am Gaius, whatever his name, and I've come here to assassinate you. And he said, and I don't care about myself. And he puts his hand in the flame that's there, the fire that they have, and says, this is how little I care for myself. And there are 500 other people like me. And as a result, the guy just said, go, you've done enough damage to yourself, get out of here. And then he started talks with Rome, and it eventually led to peace, so he was a big hero.
Right.
So I've changed him to a tailgating environment, where he's putting his hand on the grill. But the other thing about this is they would always be depicted as nudes, even though clearly he didn't sneak into the other camp as a nude, because they were always echoing back to the Greek and Roman ideal.
Right.
And so that the contrivance of making figures somehow a nude figure is part of what comes into this.
Why do you think that was the tendency?
I think, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. I think that there was the Romans and Greeks who admired the human body and depicted it, and they had no apologies. But as time went on, for various reasons, it became less acceptable. It was always an acceptable way of dealing with the human figure to relate it back to the Greek and Romans. So, for instance, Michelangelo's David, I often joke about this. Just about every David I think you ever see is nude, and I'm going like, wouldn't he at least wear a cup? I mean, he's going after a giant. But he's really not this boy. He's this Greek and Roman classical ideal of a person. So it's done again and again where the figure is idealized in the kind of Greek and Roman tradition as an excuse for doing what we really want to do, which is paint the figure.
Right.
An interesting thing, I don't know if this should be part of the article, but
What about you? Do you really just want to paint the figure?
Yeah.
This is all a bunch of show.
that's all shit. I just make the crap up.
Really though?
No, I'm going to be real. Everybody, I think, has certain things that they're drawn to, and I'm drawn to depicting the human figure.
Right.
So you have to decide how you're going to do this. And am I going to just get a model and make paintings and, do a sort of mediocre, middle-of-the-road kind of depiction of a figure that you've seen a billion times, or am I going to do something inventive with it? I think there are people that gravitate toward geometry and make geometric paintings, and they have to constantly reinvent reasons to make geometric paintings. You know what I mean?
Right, but it's not a negative thing to say contrive ways, because that's what art is in a certain way. It's like you have a passion for something and you figure out how to make that relevant to people.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and just let me say this without thinking I'm going to be quoted for a second, but you can get the essence of what I'm saying. Well, first of all, I've asked a lot of people, male and females, and I don't know whether this is cultural or whether it's somehow biological, but both say they prefer the female figure. I've rarely run into a person that says, I would rather see male figures. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's very much the minority. And again, maybe that's cultural. Who knows? We've been trained to think that way. But
This is male or female?
Yeah, male. Women. I'm always surprised, and they say, I don't want to see men. I like women figures. And they always say there's something beautiful about them, and whatever.
Right.
And the other thing is what I've observed in people is that whatever they say or don't say, I just observed this real interest in the human figure when they see it. Like, people respond to my work very, very strongly. And I'm trying to think of examples, and they're not coming to me, but it happens all the time, and I think to myself, people that really know a lot about art, they just respond to this, and they're responding to the figure, because ultimately I think biologically we have this sort of innate desire to admire the human figure.
Right.
And so I have that as an artist, and I always have. I've always been drawn to it, and believe me, I know there are things I could do that would be more successful, be more accessible on a different level, but
right.
And I just drift back to this time and time again, and at some point I just said, no, this is what I do.
Right. Do you think that there's a certain, what would you say, like hypocrisy in the way that people allow themselves to look at figure paintings, especially nudes, like because it's such a long tradition and they feel that it's too traditional in some way. Do you think people aren't sort of admitting to themselves, say, well, this is nice to look at, in a way?
As a figure, as
Yeah.
a human figure.
Right.
Like they justify it saying this is art, so it's,
Yeah.
is that what you mean? Another theme that has run through my art in the past is there's more than one, but there's a particular Greek statue that I was always drawn to, and it's a Niobe, which is one of the children of Niobe. And Niobe's children were killed by a jealous goddess because Niobe claimed to be something, the best archer, I forget what.
Right.
And so this figure is kneeling, it's got drapery, partially nude. She's reaching back ostensibly to pull an arrow out, but the arrow has long since been gone. And you look at the pose, and it's very close to the Marilyn Monroe pose on the calendar.
Really?
Which I've used in the past as a
Yeah.
comparison.
Right.
And my thinking has always been that ultimately that sculptor wanted to paint a cheesecake, depiction of a woman,
Right.
or sculpt it, But they used this excuse. I
Right,
mean,
right.
and so that's my point. I think we've always done it.
Right.
I'm not sure if that was your.
Yes,
original
that's
question.
sort of what I'm getting at. But that's more about, I guess that's more about what the artist's impetus is. But as viewers, I think there's going to be a sort of guilt associated with admitting
Right.
you
so,
like
so that's the thing.
human figures.
So
like
you
it's
get-
biology. Of course
Right.
you do.
Yeah. So you get to look at that Greek figure, and you get to say, "Wow, that's beautiful! Isn't this great
Right.
art?" But you look at
So
that
you're
pinup.
allowed to,
Yes.
because of the
It
art
grants
label.
you that permission. So you look at that pinup, and that today it's pretty tame, but in its day it was scandalous.
Mm-hmm.
Yet those same people will go to the museum and look at this sculpture.
Right.
And
What
then
is the real difference there?
You mean between a Marilyn Monroe pinup and
Yeah.
my point? My argument was always that there isn't a real difference.
Yeah.
The difference is pretense. Like this claims to be art,
Right.
and this doesn't.
Right.
And we dismiss this as pop. And then, so what happens, the world explodes pop art and postmodernism, and we've now come to appreciate all kinds of popular culture and elevated them, put them on the same level as fine art. And so now,
Right.
like, we don't know where that line is anymore.
Right.
And so I don't know what else I wanted to say. Oh, let me tell you something about the process.
Well, I mean, before we get there, like,
Okay,
are
okay,
you
yeah.
that same sort of hypocrite?
Yeah, you really put me in a spot here, right? What do you mean? Define that same sort of hypocrite so I can.
Are you
figure it
somebody
out.
who's just using art as an excuse to paint the body?
So my answer to that is, using art to paint the body. I don't know if that's hypocritical. That just using art to paint the body is what I do.
Yeah.
But if you mean, I could take photographs, right? I could be a photographer.
Right.
So I'm a painter, and so I'm going to reverse the order of the question here.
Fine.
I'm interested in the human figure, and always have been, and interested in the human figure and how it is depicted in art. But I didn't decide to do the human figure driven by an artistic idea.
Right.
I decided to do the human figure and then look for an appropriate artistic idea.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that hypocritical?
I don't know.
You want it to be?
I don't want it to be anything. That's why I asked the question.
I don't know. Of course I don't think. Who's going to say they think they're hypocritical? I just wanted to hear how you're defining it.
Right.
I think I am very forthrightly painting the human figure because I care about it.
Right.
But I know that as an artist, you call this off the record if you want, but I don't think it's off the record really. You
It
just
can
have to
be.
dress it up.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, it's always true as an artist. Well, if you aspire to be thought of as a contemporary artist, if you aspire to speak to contemporary issues in art, to address things that are relevant and current, and then you have an interest,
Right.
you always say, how can I make my interest fit
Right.
the concerns of today?
Right.
So, I'm very happy doing what I'm doing, but I could have taken any number of paths if the world of art was a different world, But this is the world we live in, so this is the path I've taken.
Right.
I make my love fit I hope I make my life fit the world we're in, you know?
Right.
On the other hand, I don't and could be on, I mean, that's on the record, the idea of what I
Right.
just said.
Right.
But on the other hand, I don't really compromise because there are ways I could make my art fit even better into the contemporary art world.
Right.
But I insist on doing what I want to do.
Right. Right.
And then doing my best to make it address the things I care about. And
That's right.
as we talked on the way up, I really care about the issues in contemporary art and the conceptual underpinnings of art. And I want those things to be in my work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I look for ways. I probably say, at this point I also say, you know, I can go off and I can suddenly do something totally different. I've actually entertained the idea of coming up with another name as another artist and doing a whole other series of work that's not Bruce Adams' art, because I have other interests.
Right.
But at this point in my life, people know me as a figurative artist, and I don't feel like I'm trapped there, but I don't. And if you really look at the work I've done, you know Divine Beauty, but you go before that, there was the tattooed women, and that was nudity, but pretty much everything else I've had was not.
Right.
They were figurative, but they were like the one paintings of pictures of people with painting series. They were all clothed the way they were in museums, you know.
Right.
And the technology series, same thing. They were. That's going way back. And the archaeology series, none of those had the nude figure. They did have figures.
Right.
So I think when I started Divine, I'll tell you something about this that you can include or not, I don't care. When I did the Divine Beauty series, as it got near the end, there was a chilling effect. And the effect was, I'm appropriating all these images from advertising, and I know that's protected by the exceptions to the copyright rule, the fair use exceptions to copyright. But do I have the money to fight Dolce & Gabbana in court, you know?
Right.
If they send me a cease and desist letter, what's it going to cost me even just to get a lawyer to write a letter back and hope they back off?
Right.
And so at some point I said, I'm not going to appropriate images for a while, maybe ever. I'm going to actually use real people in my paintings.
Right.
And so this is where the process comes in. So I invite people various different ways to actually participate. So I tell people to come and bring an assortment of clothing, props, whatever they want, and I don't say what they should be. I give them some vague idea about what I'm doing, and they bring stuff, and then they work with me on poses and I take literally, generally around 350 to 400 photos.
Okay.
Often the ones that happen in between are the ones that end up being, I end up using. I love kind of accidental shadows. Sometimes I stage shadows, but sometimes I try to have shadows just occur kind of apparently accidentally.
Yeah.
And I love, playing with those things, and obviously I've played with color, but basically it's a collaboration. These people come to me and they kind of represent themselves the way they want to.
Yeah.
And then I go through the images, and then I retrofit them to some mythology. And sometimes it's kind of I'll Google things, I'll Google things like, these are easy. Let me think of it. What's a good one? Did I Google? Well, okay. I don't know how I actually don't remember how I did this now. Trying to think of an example. Well, I can't even think of an example right now. But I'll Google keywords.
Right.
And the keywords will suggest to me a goddess or a god. Some I know ahead of time, like Leda is the swan, so that's going to be easy. But okay, for instance, if you Google mythology, god, mirror, it'll come up with Narcissus,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so I will sometimes Google keywords and it tells me something. Or like, what's the name? I gotta remind myself. Oh, it is Nemesis, I was gonna say that. You Google Nemesis and it turns out that one of her symbols is a wheel. So you find that out about the goddess. So I put the word wheel into Google and it gives you all kinds of things, including the Ferris wheel.
Right.
And then I look at it and I go, oh, that's a nice image.
Yeah.
I'd like that to be included. So it's kind of, I'm playing with these things.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
I like that. Can we do, I'd like to do a slideshow if possible, like I did.